The woman who almost died in my barn in the winter of 1884 is now asleep in the next room, and I can still hear her breathing if I hold still enough. I do that sometimes, hold still, listen. Old habit. Came from the war, stayed after. You learn to track a breath the way another man tracks a deer, by patience, by not moving, by knowing what you're listening for. In the field hospitals there were men who'd go quiet in the night, and if you weren't listening you'd lose them before you knew they were going. I got good at listening. Too good. Even now, 20 years past Appomattox, I'll wake from a dead sleep at a change in rhythm and lie there in the dark with my hand flat on the mattress, ears up, waiting. She thinks it's endearing. I've never told her what it costs to learn. My name is Thomas Calloway. I trap the high country above the Sweetwater River, sell fur in Rawlins every spring, and for about 30 years of my life I didn't talk to another human being more than was strictly necessary. I had a place. A one-room cabin I built myself in 1871 with lumber hauled up on a borrowed mule and set into a south-facing ridge where the snow ran off clean. A barn I added in '74. A root cellar the following spring. I had a dog for a while, a blue heeler named Cord, but he went after a porcupine up on the East Ridge one January, and I found him 3 days later, frozen in the brush, quills still in his face. After that, I didn't get another dog. I wasn't unhappy. That's the thing people assume, and it isn't true. I had what I needed. I had my work. I had the winter quiet, which is a particular kind of silence that city people are afraid of, and which I had come to love the way another man loves a fire or a whiskey or a woman's voice. The snow fell and the pines went still, and the whole world narrowed down to the next trap, the next meal, the next cord of wood split and stacked. There was nothing in that life that asked anything of me I wasn't prepared to give. That was both the good thing and the problem. The November she came to me was a hard one. Snow started early, before the end of October, and didn't let up. By the second week of November, the drifts on the north face of my ridge were up past my hip, and I was cutting the trapline short and coming back early because the cold was moving wrong. Not the usual mountain cold, which is clean and dry and honest, but something wetter and meaner that came up out of the south and didn't know what it wanted to be. Too warm for hard freeze, too cold to rain. Somewhere in between that ices everything invisible, the kind of cold that catches you. I was coming down off the East Ridge on the 14th of November when I saw the horse. She was a bay mare, standing in the open below the tree line, and she was carrying a rider who wasn't carrying herself. The woman was slumped forward over the mare's neck with one hand tangled in the mane and the other hanging loose at her side. And from 50 yards I could tell the mare had been standing there a while, because there was a 1/4 inch of ice crystals on the woman's coat, and the mare's flanks were heaving wrong, not exhausted, but scared, the way horses get when they know something is wrong with the person on their back, and they don't know what to do about it. I came down through the snow at a run. She was cold, not the cold of someone who'd been out an hour, but deep cold, the kind that's gotten into the muscle. Her lips were the color of a bruise, and her fingers, when I pried them out of the mane, were stiff as sticks. She was breathing, I checked first before anything else, because that's the first thing, but barely. Shallow and wet, with a catch in the middle of each inhale that I didn't like. I didn't know her. I'd never seen her. She was young, younger than I'd first thought, maybe 25, maybe less, with dark hair frozen into the collar of her coat, and an expression that wasn't pain and wasn't peace, but something worse. The expression of a person who has stopped deciding. I got her down off the mare. She came half awake when I lifted her and made a sound that wasn't a word, just a sound, and then went back under again. I hauled her to the barn because the barn was closer and warmer than the cabin on account of the animals, and I got her down into the hay in the corner stall and started stripping the wet things off her. Not out of anything but necessity. Wet kills. First thing they teach you in field medicine, get the wet off. Everything else comes after. Her coat was soaked through, her boots had filled, her hands were white at the tips. I worked fast. Dry wool blankets from the tack chest, 2 of them, my spare coat over the top. I got a lantern going for what heat it through and pulled in the two horses I had, a gray gelding and a roan I used for packing, and put them in close because a horse puts out more heat than most people know. Then I sat down in the hay beside her and I waited. That's what people don't understand about medicine. Even real medicine, the kind with doctors and instruments and clean linen. Half of it is waiting. You do what you can with what you have, and then you wait and you watch and you listen, and either they come back or they don't, and there is no amount of skill or care that makes the difference certain. I had sat in this particular chair before. Different barn, different century, different person. Boys in blue and boys in gray, both of them looking the same once they were down. I had held pressure on wounds that couldn't be held. I had watched faces go slack in a particular way that you learn to recognize. I had done everything I knew how to do and watched it not be enough, more times than I could count. I knew the difference between dying and not. She wasn't dying. She was close to it, close enough that I kept the lantern burning and didn't sleep, kept my hand near but not on her wrist so I could feel the pulse without disturbing her. But she was fighting. Something in her was still working, still choosing, even if she didn't know it, even if there was nothing in her face that showed it. The breath came and it caught and it came again. An hour passed. 2. The horses shifted and blew and settled. Outside the wind picked up and then died. Around 3 in the morning she shivered. It sounds like nothing, but in field medicine, a shiver is a prayer answered. A shiver means the body has decided to warm itself. A shiver means it's still in the fight. I added a third blanket and I said out loud to no one and to her, "There you go." She woke just after dawn. I was sitting against the opposite wall of the stall with my legs stretched out in front of me, and I had been sitting there so long that my back had gone from aching to numb, and then to a general indifference, and I was looking at her the way you look at something you've been watching all night. Not anymore seeing it, just aware of it, the way you're aware of a fire or a lamp without exactly looking. She opened her eyes. There's a moment before a person knows where they are, before they remember what happened or figure out they're alive. Just a moment, but it's long. I've seen it 100 times and it never looks the same twice. Some people come up fighting. Some come up confused. Some come up grateful in a way that's almost painful to see. She came up still. Just still. Eyes open, looking at the ceiling of the stall, then slowly tracking down until they found me. And she looked at me. I don't know what she saw. A big man, gray-haired by then, with a beard I kept trimmed but not well, sitting against the wood wall of a barn in a coat that smelled of horse and pine and wood smoke. Nothing to look at. Nothing that would have told her she was safe. Just a stranger's face. But she looked at me for a long moment, and she didn't look afraid. That was the thing I couldn't shake. Later, when I tried to explain it to myself, that was what I kept coming back to. She had woken up in a strange place, hurt, cold, no idea where she was or how she'd gotten there. Any reasonable person would have been frightened. She was not frightened. She looked at me the way you look at something you've been searching for and have finally found, even though that made no sense, because she didn't know me from Adam, and I surely was not what anybody had ever been searching for. She said very quietly, "Are you real?" I said, "Far as I know." She closed her eyes again, but not the way she'd closed them the night before, something different in it, something that was choosing rest, not giving up. I sat there in the hay with my back against the cold wood, and I thought about that for a long time. Her name was Marta Voss. She was 23 years old, a German immigrant woman from a settlement on the Sweetwater, the daughter of a farmer who had died of fever the previous summer, and whose land had subsequently been taken by a man named Harker on a debt the old man may or may not have actually owed. She had one brother, Pieter, 2 years younger. She had a mother who was now living with relatives in Rawlins because there was nowhere else to go. She told me this over the course of 3 days as I moved her into the cabin and she came back to herself by degrees. She told it plainly, without self-pity, which I noted. Not because I don't have patience for self-pity. God knows I've felt it myself, but because the plainness of it told me something about her. What had happened to her family was genuinely terrible, and she knew it was terrible, and she was not going to sit in it and dissolve. She'd been riding to Rawlins, she said, trying to reach her mother. Her horse had taken a wrong turn somewhere in the dark, and she'd lost the trail, and then she'd gotten too cold to think clearly enough to find it again. And the last thing she remembered before she woke up in my barn was deciding that she was too tired to hold on anymore, and that it would be all right to sleep for a while. That's usually the last decision a person makes, I told her. I know that, she said. I knew it then, I made it anyway. I didn't say anything to that. What is there to say? I've seen men make that choice. Usually something specific leads them there, a letter from home, a wound that won't stop, a battle that goes on one day too long. The exhaustion of holding on when holding on has no clear purpose. Why were you out at night in November? I asked instead. She looked at her hands. She had both of them wrapped around a tin cup I'd filled with broth, and she was looking at them the way you look at something that was almost taken from you and isn't yet quite familiar again. The tips of 2 fingers on her left hand had gone black, but lightly she'd keep them. Harker came back, she said. I knew the name, not personally, but in the way you know names out here by what people say when they say them, by the particular silence that falls in a room. Harker was a landman. Had been acquiring property on the Sweetwater for 5 years by methods that were technically legal and practically something else. Nobody confronted him directly because nobody felt certain enough of their ground. He came to the house, she said, where Pieter and I had been staying while we figured out what to do. He said the debt had transferred. He said we had to be out by end of November. What about Pieter? Pieter said he'd shoot him. I didn't say anything. Pieter is 19, she said. Harker had 4 men with him. She looked up from her hands then and looked at me with a steadiness that I was starting to understand was simply her. The way some people have blue eyes and some have brown, she simply had that quality of looking at a hard thing without flinching. It didn't make her hard, it made her honest. I left to get help, she said. I don't know what help, I just needed to be doing something. I kept her for a week. Not as a prisoner, not even as a guest in the formal sense. More the way you keep a fire going because it needs tending and because if you let it go you'll be sorry. She was weak for the first 3 days, genuinely weak, the bone exhaustion of a body that came back from the wrong side of something and is taking stock. She slept a lot. I fed her. I didn't ask her questions she didn't offer answers to, and she didn't ask me questions about what I was doing out there alone on a ridge in November, which I appreciated. On the 4th day she was up and moving, carefully, testing her legs. She found the broom in the corner and swept my floor before I knew she was planning to. I came in from the woodpile to find the cabin cleaner than it had been in 6 months, and her standing at the window looking out at the ridge. You don't have to do that, I said. I know, she said. She turned from the window. In the daylight from the glass, she looked less like the woman I'd carried out of the cold and more like herself, which is to say, like a person with a history and a will and opinions she was deciding whether to share. You're Thomas Calloway, she said. I told you that. I know, but I've heard the name. My father talked about you once. Said there was a man up on the ridge who came down once a year and traded fair, and didn't say more than necessary, and was the best hand with a sick animal in the county. I didn't know what to do with that, so I set down the wood. My father admired men like that, she said. She said it simply, not as a compliment, not fishing, just telling me a fact about her father. He said they were the last of something. Your father was probably right, I said. She nodded once, like she was noting something she'd confirm later, and went back to looking out the window. On the 5th day, I rode down to the Voss place. I told her I was going to check on Pieter. I didn't tell her the other part. It was a 12-mile ride, most of it into wind, and by the time I got there my face was raw and my mood was not what you'd call conciliatory. The Voss farm was a decent piece of ground, good soil, good water access, the kind of place a man builds thinking about his grandchildren. The house was small but solid. There were signs of recent occupation. Pieter's horse was in the lean-to. Pieter turned out to be a skinny kid with his sister's eyes, and a rifle he was holding like he wasn't entirely sure what it was for. He looked at me the same way any 19-year-old looks at a big gray-haired man who shows up uninvited, with a combination of wariness and the effort of pretending not to be wary. "Your sister's all right," I said. "She's at my place on the ridge. She'll be back when the weather clears." Some of the stiffness went out of him, not all of it. "Who are you?" "Thomas Calloway. I found her on the East Ridge. She'd have been dead by morning." He processed that, nodded, didn't say thank you, which told me he was still scared and covering it badly. "You know a man named Harker," I said. "I know him." "He been back?" "Not yet, said end of November." "All right," I said. I looked at the place, the fence line, the outbuildings, the ground around the house which still had some of the cultivation marks from the Voss farm's last worked season. Good ground, like I said, the kind of ground that feeds a family. "You hold," I told him. "Don't shoot anybody, I'll be back." He looked at me like he wasn't sure whether to believe me. I rode back up the ridge and arrived after dark and ate the supper Marta had left covered on the stovetop for me without being asked, and I sat with it for a while in the lamplight, thinking about the fact that I'd been alone for a long time and hadn't minded. And now I'd been home for 20 minutes, and already there was a warmth in the room that wasn't from the stove. That's the thing about competence, about knowing how to do something, really knowing it, the way it gets into your hands and your habits and the way you see a problem. You go for years and nobody needs what you know. The skills just sit there, maintaining themselves, and you don't think much about it because you don't need to. And then something happens, and you need them and they're still there. I went to see Harker on the 7th day. I won't recount the conversation in detail, because some of it is not suitable, and some of it I don't remember exactly, and some of it doesn't need repeating. The short version is this. I had paperwork from my years of land ownership on the ridge, deeds, surveys, registered with the territory, and I had a modest reputation in those parts as a man who had never had cause to threaten anyone, and was not the kind of person to make idle statements. I had also, in my time as a field medic, and then as a trapper, dealt with enough difficult men to know the difference between a man who is genuinely dangerous and a man who has simply never been told no by someone he believed. Harker was the second kind. I told him that the Voss debt was not transferable under territorial law as I understood it, which I'd confirmed by sending a letter to Rawlins before I came. I told him that Pieter Voss intended to register a legal protest, and that I intended to accompany him, and that several other landholders in the area had expressed an interest in the matter. I told him that his methods were known, and that known methods tend to attract scrutiny. And I told him at the end, in the tone I'd used exactly twice in my life, once with a man who was about to shoot a 16-year-old private, and once with a man who was about to knife someone in a trading post in '76, that I was not interested in escalation, and I'd like this to stay a business conversation. Harker looked at me for a long moment. He left the Voss place alone. I went back to the cabin, and Marta was at the table with a lamp lit and a book open that she'd found on my shelf, one of 3 I owned, a volume of military history I'd had since the war and hadn't opened in years. She looked up when I came in, and she read something in my face before I said a word, and she closed the book. "Is it settled?" she said. "Settled enough," I said. She nodded. She looked down at the table. She said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know that." "Why did you?" I hung my coat. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat. I thought about how to answer that, which took longer than most answers do. I was a field medic in the war, I said. Spent 4 years putting men back together. Some of them were going to die no matter what I did. Some of them didn't have to, except that nobody was paying attention at the right moment. I looked at my hands, the way she'd looked at hers. I got tired of the ones that didn't have to. She was quiet for a moment. "You're not tired anymore," she said. "No," I said, "I'm not." It was a strange thing to say. I hadn't known it was true until I said it, and even then I wasn't entirely sure of it. But there are some truths that only come out when somebody asks the right question, and she had a particular gift for that, for asking the question that unlocked the thing you'd been carrying around without knowing it was there. She didn't say anything else. She opened the book again. I got up and added wood to the stove. We sat like that for an hour without talking, and it was one of the most comfortable hours I'd spent in 30 years. She left 3 days after that, when the trail was clear enough for safe riding. Her mother came up from Rawlins to meet her at the Voss place, and Pieter was there, and there was a reunion of the kind I wasn't needed for and wouldn't have been comfortable at. I gave her the bay mare back, freshly shod because she'd thrown a shoe, and I'd pulled the others and reset all 4 while she was in my cabin. I gave her a roll of dried meat and a canvas sack of cornmeal because it was a hard time of year, and the Voss root cellar had been badly depleted. She took these things without protest, which told me she understood that practical help wasn't charity. She stood with her horse in my yard, the cabin behind her, the ridge above, the sky the color of pewter and full of the particular thin light of November in the high country, and she looked at me the way she'd looked at me when she first woke up. That same stillness, that same absence of fear. "I'll come back in the spring," she said. Not asking, not inviting herself, just saying a thing that was true. "Roads'll be clearer by April," I said. She nodded. She put her foot in the stirrup and swung up with the ease of someone who'd grown up on horses, and she pointed the bay down the trail, and then she turned back once. Not dramatically. The way you turn back when there's one more thing that needs to be said. "Thomas," she said. I looked at her. "You are real," she said. She said it the way she'd asked it in the barn, quietly, directly, as a statement of something she'd spent time confirming. And then she rode down off the ridge and the trees took her, and I stood in my yard in the cold for longer than was strictly necessary before I went inside. She came back in April, like she said. And in May and June, she helped me rebuild the root cellar, which had partially collapsed over the winter. She had a practical understanding of joinery that surprised me until she mentioned her father had been a carpenter in Saxony before he came over. We worked in a companionable way that didn't require talking, which I had not known was possible with another person. In July she stayed a week. In August I rode down to the Voss place every Sunday, which Pieter noticed and said nothing about in a way that communicated considerable amusement. We were married that October in Rawlins in front of a judge, with her mother and Pieter as witnesses, and a man I trapped with named Gus Abernathy who showed up because I'd mentioned it in passing, and he took that as an invitation. It was not an elaborate ceremony. Marta wore a dress the color of pine needles. I wore my good coat, which she had cleaned and pressed for the occasion without commenting on the state it had been in before. Afterward the 4 of us ate at the hotel dining room, which was the nicest restaurant in Rawlins and not a very nice restaurant, and Gus got slightly drunk on the hotel's terrible wine and gave a toast that went on long enough to include a detailed account of how he once helped me skin a bear, the relevance of which I still don't fully understand. Marta laughed at it. I'd been hearing her laugh for nearly a year by then, and it still did something to the center of my chest that I wouldn't have known how to describe. Her mother held my hand when we left and said, in her accented English, "Thank you for finding her." I didn't say what I thought, which was, I didn't find her. She came to me. I was just paying attention. That was 1885. It is 1891 now. The cabin is larger by 2 rooms. The root cellar is solid. The barn has been extended, and I keep 6 horses now. Marta has an eye for horses that I don't, and she has begun buying and reselling with a judgment that has made us more comfortable than I expected to be in this life. Pieter works a section of the ridge below us, raising cattle, and comes up Sundays for dinner in the summer. I still trap, less than I used to. The fur prices have come down and the high country is getting busier, which I knew would happen eventually. But I go up in November and come down in March, and it gives me something I don't quite have words for: the old quiet, the old particular silence, but with the knowledge now that there is a lamp burning in the window and someone inside who knows when to expect me and will notice if I don't come. That is not a small thing. I have spent most of my life being capable of things without anyone knowing or needing to know, knowing how to keep a man alive, how to read a problem before it becomes a confrontation, how to build a thing that will last, how to wait in the cold through a long night until the thing you're waiting on gives you a sign. These skills were mine, and they were real, and they served their purpose whether or not anyone saw them. But there is a difference between a useful thing and a needed thing. And there is a further difference still between being needed and being known. She knows me. That's the truth of it, the plain fact under everything else. She came out of the cold and opened her eyes and looked at a stranger's face, and she decided, not then, not in that first moment, but over months and then years, that the face was one she could trust, that the man behind it was one she wanted, that his particular kind of quietness and competence and accumulated solitude were not deficits in him but the shape of him, and the shape fit something in her. I don't know what that is worth, in the broad accounting of a life. I know what it feels like. She's awake now. I can tell by the change in her breathing, the slight shift in rhythm, the small adjustment of weight in the bed that carries through the wall when she rolls over. 20-some years ago, I learned to track a breath for fear. Now I track it for something else entirely, something that doesn't have a name I'm comfortable saying out loud, something that probably doesn't need one. In a few minutes she'll come out to the kitchen. She'll find the stove already going. I've been up since 5, old habit, and the coffee ready, which she'll comment on in a way that isn't quite a thank you and isn't quite a complaint, but is somewhere in between that is entirely her. She'll sit at the table and wrap both hands around the mug, the way she still does, and she'll look out the window at the ridge. And I'll sit across from her and I'll drink my coffee and I'll be quiet, and she'll be quiet, and the cabin will have that morning quality that I cannot describe to you, that particular weight and warmth of 2 people who have chosen to be in the same room and mean it. That is the whole thing. That's all of it. I found a woman half dead in the snow, and I kept her alive, and I handled what needed handling, and I waited. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't offer anything except what I knew how to do. And she woke up and looked at me with those steady eyes and decided, in the fullness of time, that I was enough. I don't know what I was before that. I know who I am now.